Promote a culture of inclusion, supercharge your communication, and unleash the full potential of your teams and leaders with the Inclusive Handbook collection from the Diversity Movement. As part of the collection, I wrote the Inclusive Leadership Handbook with Kurt Merriweather to empower leaders with tools needed to cultivate a culture that fosters creativity, innovation, and employee engagement. Through strategies, exercises, and self-reflection, leaders at all levels can enhance their effectiveness. Learn more at thediversitymovement.com/store. Use code HOL at checkout for 25% of your first order.
DEI budgets are under attack, but the goals haven't changed. Whether you're looking to increase your DEI knowledge, expand your market reach, or gain a competitive advantage in business, we have the solution. TDM Library is your single source for expert-curated DEI resources, strategies, and solutions, all designed to help you transform your workplace culture and be a more effective contributor. For $9.99 per month, you get access to our searchable subscription-based digital library. There, you'll find articles, practical how-to guidebooks, podcasts, award-winning microvideos, and more than 700 Q&As. Designed to help DEI practitioners, thought leaders, and executives create a more inclusive workplace. Whether you prefer to listen, watch, or read, we have the resources for you. TDM Library goes beyond the basics to dive deep into topics such as inclusive language, the business case for DEI, talent acquisition, and C-suite engagement. For less than the price of a sandwich, you get access to our library of more than 1,000 pieces of original, expert-curated DEI content. Join today and get your first 30 days free. Get your library card now at tdmlibrary.thediversitymovement.com.
You can't stop me, nothing's gonna stand in my way. Nothing. I'm gonna fly higher. I'm gonna fly higher.
Hey everyone, and welcome to the Donald Thompson Podcast. Today's guest is one of the most successful entrepreneurs in the Triangle. Joe Colopy is a Harvard grad, an early employee of Red Hat, and the founder of the software company Bronto, located on Durham's American Tobacco campus. In 2015, Joe sold the company to NetSuite for $200 million. But his ventures didn't end there. Now he's on the Triangle startup scene where he runs both Colopy Ventures and Jurassic Capital. Plus, he's created a tech startup newsletter called GretB, which you can have delivered to your inbox every Tuesday and Thursday. With a $200 million exit and a degree from Harvard, you might expect Joe to have a huge ego and record this episode from an exotic location. But that's just not him. Joe values community, spending 2 years in the Peace Corps. He enjoys family and spending time raising his kids, and selected RTP over any other area in the country to build and raise a family. As a giver, he's spent and willing to spend time with our audience today. So welcome, Joe Colopy. Joe, thanks for hanging out with us.
Oh, thanks for having me. It's a thrill to be here in this rainy morning that we have here.
Hey, that's exactly right. And one of the things, Joe, that we like to do to just get everybody engaged, and really for you and I just to continue to dive in and just speak candidly as friends, give me a little background on you. Not even so much business, like where you're from, brothers and sisters, just so we can get to know each other a little bit.
Yeah. So I was kind of born and raised in Akron, Ohio, graduated up to high school there. I am the 3 out of 4 brothers, or 8 out of 9 if you consider half brothers. So no sisters. And I think I have on one side 8 cousins and 7 of them are boys. So the XY gene runs strong through that side of the family. Graduated kind of back in the day from Firestone High School, Falcons, for those of you from the Akron area, and went to Harvard and studied there computer science and economics. Graduated in kind of the early 90s or so, and then joined the Peace Corps. So I was a peace volunteer for 2 years in these group of islands called the Seychelles Islands, which are these tiny independent set of islands off of East Africa. But I spent 2 years there as a teacher,
Awesome.
And I taught at what was a polytechnic. So it would be comparable to like a high school. And
Nice.
it was kind of like the top school in a country of 75,000 people. So take that for whatever it's worth. But I loved it. And after that, my girlfriend was finishing up her master's and I was finishing up Peace Corps. So she came out and we traveled through Africa for a while. And then I'd always wanted to live in Ecuador because Ecuador means equator in Spanish. And I thought that was fascinating enough to kind of live there. So we're able to finagle jobs at a kind of a private elementary school, middle school, high school in Guayaquil, Ecuador. So, well, this was not part of the Peace Corps, and this school was a private school, was fairly new, and it had some drama at the beginning. There were two business partners. One was the American, one was the Ecuadorian. The Ecuadorian guy essentially embezzled the payroll right before we got there. And then for some weird Ecuadorian justice way, sent a judge with a warrant to arrest the American partner, and then he was on the run. Either way, after like 3 or 4 months, and there was one part where they had gunmen come to the school looking for this guy. It didn't affect me, but just you should never have gunmen coming to school. Like that should never be part of the conversation, right?
Right.
My girlfriend, now wife, were like, you know what, this is not a great working environment. It's a little bit too exciting for us. And so we were coming back to the States for a wedding. So we came back here and we're like, you know what? I don't think that's a great fit for us. And we've been away from the US for a while. Maybe it's time to get settled here. And so I was thinking of grad school, and we were thinking where we want to live. And we said, I read about Raleigh, Durham, North Carolina. That sounds kind of cool. They've got some grad schools there. Why don't we just move there? And we're like, yeah, let's do it. And so we just drove down here in my now wife's dad's old minivan, and we just got settled. And we ended up settling randomly in an apartment that's actually a few blocks from where we live today in Trinity Park neighborhood of Durham. And we got settled, we got jobs. I applied to grad school. A year later, ended up at UNC Business School. Did that for 2 years. Wanted to do something entrepreneurial. I always had aspects of that in tech entrepreneurial. So found this little startup I thought was really compelling, finagled, begged, borrowed, and stole my way in there. And I was essentially started interning at Red Hat when they were a little under 100 people, and was able to convince them into giving me a full-time job despite all their reservations of hiring an MBA, which are good reservations to have. That's a good thing. And obviously that was an exciting year. They went public, they got much bigger. And then, a year and a half later, I decided that I knew everything I needed to know. As my teenagers tell me all the time, they seem to know everything. Yeah. And so left and then started working on something called Bronto, right? So there's a lot there. So that's a little bit, and along the way, while building Bronto, my wife and I, we had gotten married. We have, and still have, even though every day is a toss-up, we still have 4 kids, awesome. 2 in high school, 12th and 9th grade, 6th grader and a 4th grader.
That is awesome. And thanks for that introduction and overview.
That's a long snapshot.
No, but it's super interesting, right? From Peace Corps to successful entrepreneur. And usually people kind of stereotype, right, that if somebody's into social good, then they can also have the financial wherewithal to want financial gain and to live a life that's fiscally well off. And that I was talking actually to a group of Gen Z folks the other day, and it was very interesting. They actually made the point to me that they believe in fiscal prosperity. They just think you can do social good and be fiscally successful at the same time. Yeah. They don't have to be mutually exclusive. And so that was really interesting. And I love that, how it weaves into your story as well.
Yeah, I definitely believe that. So 2 things. One, I heard the term the other day of Gen Z, because I have 4 of them, is they refer to them as Zoomers. So instead of boomers, Zoomers, like Zoom. I thought that was kind of funny. And 2, in building, I'm sure we'll talk about this company called Bronto, I was able to bring some of those concepts in, exactly what you talked about, that really resonated well with everyone there and certainly resonated well with me. is we started a community committee to kind of have people in the company volunteer as a group with Habitat and Seeds, Urban Ministries, and all these kind of community development things around Durham, because that's where we were based. And the whole premise was that you can do good and also be successful business. In fact, it helps you be successful business versus I'm doing good and I'm making a trade-off.
No, that's phenomenal. And I appreciate the context. One of the things that is a struggle for entrepreneurs and people that want to chase something maybe outside a traditional corporate environment is, how do you choose the right idea, right? And yes, there's risk and ideas can ebb and flow, but you do want to mitigate that risk by choosing something that has a chance to be substantial. When you think back, and then we'll weave into Bronto, but I want to start with, how did you come up with the idea around email marketing and different things that you guys were doing? And how did you become a believer in that idea?
Yeah, so I in some ways don't look so much on the idea itself. I think it's important to kind of know what area you're in. I think, there's so much to this simple question, but it's such a great one that comes up all the time. There are kind of a couple different schools of thought. One that I don't believe and one I do believe, like all things. And the one is often what's promoted is the idea that one is sitting in their office or at their desk or wherever, and then there's this brilliant idea fully formed that comes up to them, that they comes to them, to no one else, and then they kind of release it on the world and like life is easy. Obviously, that's not exactly how people think of it, but that's one extreme of it. I kind of believe that it is, when I speak to a lot of entrepreneurs, is more about, you find things you're passionate about and you have some basic ideas of what makes a good business. And if you're kind of wired that way in terms of scalability and you actually want to build an organization, a business, that whatever the idea is actually probably not so great, right? It's probably pretty general. And it's hard to know all the nooks and crannies of what would make the business successful or be differentiated with customers when you start in isolation, because you really probably don't have a lot more knowledge about it than anyone else. And even if you studied it academically, it's still kind of academic. And, once you take it out of the lab, the real world's a little bit different, than a controlled environment. But I think it's important to kind of get started. And when you get started, what I think makes a good successful entrepreneur are a few things. And one of them is they're just keenly realistic and they're keenly listening to what's going on. And they take that genesis of an idea or concept, and then they kind of twist and turn, and they're refining it. And it's those little twists and turns, those little refinements that make it all different. And, a kind of an easy analogy people would say is, if you look at a lump of coal versus a diamond, they're not really that different, right? But they're very different. And it's all like the little things that make the difference, right? And so I think that relates a little bit to my Bronto story. So when I was at Red Hat, and I left my job at Red Hat. So I left in the summer of 2000. Red Hat had gone from 100 people to about 600 people in a very short period of time. This was the middle of the dot-com boom and then the bust. But they were still doing well because they had raised tons of capital. And I made a choice. Do I want to climb up the ladder, or do I want to just kind of kick off and start something myself? And I kind of knew that, like, there's some advantages and disadvantages to starting younger. It just takes a long time, right? So if I kind of start, I think at the time I was like 20s, that's going to give me, and had no kids, a really low cost structure, that has some advantages despite my lack of experience or knowledge. What I was intrigued with was the idea of software being delivered over the web. And it wasn't a completely new idea, but it wasn't a rampant idea either, right? So Salesforce.com existed, NetSuite existed. There were a number of what one would call software as a service products there. But I was working with an online marketing at Red Hat, and we had a team in Seattle and a team in San Francisco. And if we just wanted to coordinate on something in real time, like, we really couldn't do it, right? Like, we couldn't have a Google Sheets or anything like that. And so I felt that if I could have autonomy, and I could learn how to create a simple web application that with time, if I had a very low cost structure and a very forgiving wife, which I did, still do, that eventually I would twist and turn and would come up with something good. That's kind of the confidence. Now, it was a horrible plan, right? I mean, because it took absurdly long, so I would, in terms of having the perfect idea and then going off versus mine just like jumping into the wilderness, I think I would err somewhere in between a little bit, because from that point that I left Red Hat, I didn't get another paycheck for 3 years. Now, but what really happened was the rest of 2000 was a bit of a wash. And 2001, I really learned how to create a very simple product. And the reason I wanted to create it myself is I felt that level of independence. One, it was a dot-com bust at that time, right? So there was no money to be had. Also, even if I had money, like what was I going to do? Like, I don't know enough, right? So I have to know what I don't know. So I need to kind of learn and be able to create my own product. Because I thought in that way, even if it's a crummy product, I'd be able to like alter it to fit the market. So that was kind of one. The market was terrible. I wanted to be able to kind of create my own thing. And it was environment sort of kind of like now during coronavirus, where nothing's really kind of happening in that sector, so that it was a good opportunity to learn something with minimal distractions. So it was taking advantage of it. And I had saved up a little bit of money because it was pretty and still cheap, so that my wife and I, we could survive on one salary and a car. I drove an old beater car and a mortgage payment, which we could all afford on her salary, which again comes back to the understanding wife. But we had teed ourselves up for that.
So one of the things, Joe, when you think about learnings as an entrepreneur, so talk about Bronto's growth, exit. That story is kind of documented. People that are interested can look at that.
Yes.
What I'm interested in along the way, what are some of the things that you didn't get quite right that in retrospect are now part of your learning portfolio, that when you're advising companies and you're looking at investments, you're kind of watching out for in leaders, in building technology, just some lessons learned along the way?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I think it's not just things we didn't get right. It's also things we did get right. We didn't realize that we did, And after the fact, now that I post Bronto and I kind of look at working with a lot more different startups, I see things I just took for granted that other startups don't have, or the leaders don't have. And there are things they do have, which leads to success. So it's kind of the mix, right? One of the advantages of getting a little distance for something is you get more perspective. So in terms of things we didn't do right, I think we had a very, this is good and bad, but we had a very iterative bootstrap type perspective. And so we're always just kind of working to make something incrementally better, which I think is a great attribute. That being said, I think we were, especially in the early years, penny wise, pound foolish with some things. And we really were duct taping some of our IT systems together, engineering together. And a little more investment, or even just willingness to spend on stuff, would have saved ourselves a tremendous amount of stress. So it was, our strengths in some ways were too strong. We hired fairly junior people. We really were just duct taping everything for a long time. So that's great. It makes you lean and mean. But it also meant that we probably churned more customers than we normally would. We had this attribute of we had to learn everything ourselves. Well, the reality is a lot of people know a lot of things. So, sometimes it can be helpful to ask them.
Yeah.
So I think for that, I would be a bit more measured about it. I think what we learned with time, certainly I did, which our bootstrapping helped, is really how to kind of work with people and manage people. The entrepreneurial paradox is in starting a business. My co-founder, Chance Felix, and I, you really need to be quite handy, quite resourceful, the ability to do lots of things yourself and do them well, right? That leads to a certain type of personality. But if you roll that into management or leading, that can lead to a lot of problems of micromanagement. No one can do as well as you. So you kind of top off the growth of the company based on your own capabilities. And so I think with time, and it wasn't always pretty, we had to kind of temper that. And really with time change into being good managers and then executives. And then what was fascinating is these skill sets that I would have thought were completely unrelated, like being a teacher at the Peace Corps, which really refined, teaching, which means organizing ideas and communicating them again. You really, how do you organize your ideas very clearly and communicate them and put them in an engaging way? And that doesn't really matter as much in starting something really early on, but later on, certainly once you have like 50 and 100 and 200 and 300 people, that is what makes a good leader. You're setting vision, you're communicating, you get everyone on the same page, you're really more of a mentor to people. And so I think I was fortunate in having some early experiences, which would seem completely random, that actually played huge dividends. Bronto would have been a great $2 million a year company, right? And that's nice, that's great, but it wouldn't have had an impact on a larger number of people and their lives.
Got it. No, that makes sense. Now with obviously, one of the top exits in the Southeast, right? And a homegrown story in North Carolina that is phenomenal, right? So you built a very powerful business on the East Coast versus the West Coast. Why did you stay here? Why did you believe as you grew that North Carolina could provide you everything you needed to grow a phenomenal business?
This is and I wish I could probably articulate this better because I tend to have a lot of attitude when it comes to these kind of things. I'm always put off by people who make that argument that I'm going to, not your argument, but like I need to go somewhere else to be successful, right? That somehow this isn't good enough for me. I think it's an extremely arrogant argument that some people make. And people are like, well, I was like, it's almost as if they're being swept over to Silicon Valley. They could only be that is a really, I think, obnoxious view, quite honestly, that people don't quite realize. So my view is this. If you look at Silicon Valley and you look at Boston, so I went to school at Harvard, pretty sharp cookies there. I majored in computer science, pretty sharp cookies there. Where do you think these Silicon Valley people come from? They're coming from random ass places like Akron, Ohio, that's dark and gray 9 months of the year, spending their time programming computers in elementary school. That's what I did, right? I know what that story is. I am that story, right? So is it really a matter of me going to Silicon Valley, or is it more a matter of me going to wherever I want to go, right? And nobody's successful. So I don't buy that argument that people have. It's fine if they want to go live in Silicon Valley, and you almost imply that you're lucky to have us. It's like, you know what? Go. like I don't need it, right? Because I think for people that want to add long-term value for a community, they commit to the community, right? And I really like where we live. I like the Triangle. I like where we live in Durham. That was my goal, is to have a good life first, and the work kind of plugged into that.
A powerful answer. And I think you mentioned, a couple of points, but one is just simply the confidence, right? You either believe you're going to make it or not. And that singular location decision doesn't confine your success. It just changes your journey, right? And
exactly.
That's your journey, right?
How we would have evolved was very different. So now it's possible that if we would have raised venture capital, that we would have been more successful or less successful. But one of the advantages of starting the .com bust is, I think at the beginning of businesses, there's a lot of noise, and that noise can be good and bad. You really just need to stay focused on the customers and figuring out, building something that people want. And that requires keen listening. And if there's a lot of noise because people are saying, oh, you need to raise money or do this and that, then it hurts your ability to do that, right? Now, later on, that might be a different story. But so for what we were doing, we started off selling to small businesses. They didn't really care where we were. We just needed to deliver the service well. And so we did that. Later on, as we grew, much later on, as we focused much more on e-commerce and B2C, working with B2C brands, it became valuable for us as the customers got larger to set up a sales office in New York City, right? And in London, because those were more in the industry. But we did it pretty late.
One thing I want you to expand on, because you said it twice in our dialogue, so I want to dig into it. You used the phrase keen listening.
Yes.
From a business context, like what does that mean to you?
Yeah, so I once read a Seth Godin book, and I forget which one it was, and I'm probably but he had this word he refers to one of his books called pranja, and that's a Sanskrit word. Now, it could be pronounced 100% differently than the way I read it, right? But either way, that's what I remembered. That's phonetic from my point of view. And the word basically was being keenly realistic and aware of your surroundings. And I think when growing a business, you have to be very honest. You want to be confident and have vision, but you also want to be very honest in terms of what the situation is. And I think when you listen to a customer, I think that's a challenge a lot of early stage businesses, particularly ones that are product driven. People often want to create a certain product, and you have to figure out like, what is your vision for creating the product, but what does the customer actually want? And not always listen to them literally, but you need to be able to kind of connect those dots and deliver on that. So it's kind of like being hyper aware.
Yeah.
And maybe that comes through experience. Maybe that just comes through, I don't know, it means not getting your ego in front of you. It means not like there's a lot of other things that come in. So it's not literally just listening. I mean, that's certainly part of it with your ears, but it's also being in touch kind of with what's going on and not having distractions. And I think being a fairly grounded person, not being kind of too wrapped up in your ego or this, that. For me, I think that really helps. At least that's what helped with Bronto.
No, that's really powerful. I mean, from a standpoint of what I'm hearing and I'm taking pages of notes. This is great, right? Not letting your ego get in the way of you hearing what the customer wants. A lot of times as business people, we have a vision, we have a perspective. That's why we're entrepreneurs. We have a certain way that we see the future, but the actual steps to get there always include happy customers, right?
Exactly.
So if along the way, right, you've got to take a little bit left, a little bit right to make sure that cash flow is good, that growth's good, because you're serving that customer need today while they adopt your bigger vision. People tend to adopt a bigger vision from a company while they're customers.
Yes.
Not while they're prospects. So my view is, how do you make people customers? And then you can move to a bigger vision of your product, of your company, or different things, because now they're fans with you, right? They're along the journey with you. And so,
yeah, I think that's a big part of it. At Bronto in particular, we are very employee centric too. And so we used to have the saying, happy Brontos equals happy customers too. So we saw that very much was the path.
No, that's awesome. I want to be super careful with your time, and I appreciate you taking time with us. Let's pivot now, post Bronto.
Yeah.
And now you're thinking about GretBeat and other things that you're doing. How are you making choices of where you spend your time? What are you working on? And then tell us a little bit about your technical newsletter, GretBeat, and what its purpose is and what the vision behind it is.
Sure. So like I mentioned earlier, I left the business after many years, along with Chaz in April 2016. And deliberately, the rest of 2016, I tried very hard not to jump back into something. I've been running 100 miles an hour. I wanted to spend more time with our family. And so it just took a little time to kind of wind down. I also moved houses. We moved, I think, 2 blocks away. My kids were horrified. I told them that some people move whole zip codes, but they got over it, right? So in the same neighborhood that we landed in way back. It's all the same neighborhood. This is ridiculous. But at the beginning of 2017, I incorporated something called Colopy Ventures. So Colopy is my surname, and that really was just a vehicle to do something. And of those things that have kind of popped up in the last few years, there are a couple things which I refer to as initiatives that have kind of happened. One of them is something called GretBeat. So if you think of TechCrunch from Silicon Valley, I thought one of the gaps we had in this area was to tell the stories of entrepreneurs and startups. And instead of focus on just investment or just being an entrepreneur, maybe there's this indirect benefit that can help support the entrepreneurs in the Triangle region. It really is philanthropic, a way to kind of support the local community. So I'm apparently the godfather of GretBeat. That's my official title. Maybe that would be a publisher in other terms. The second thing is called Jurassic Capital. So there's a fellow I work with, Kevin Mosley, who used to work with me back in the day at Bronto. He comes out of the financial planning operations space of software companies. And so we're investing in growth software companies. So companies that are already doing over $1 million in revenue. What happens is a lot of software companies, they get to a few $1 million in revenue. And for various reasons, they just kind of top out and hang out there. And it's a really tough place for an entrepreneur because they have something of value, definitely. But for whatever reason, it's kind of like topped out. Often they just need help, right? And so it doesn't fit within the model of some early stage brilliant idea. At the same time, it's not some huge behemoth, so it has value. They're not going to abandon it, but it's not so big where there's an exit or a next step that's obvious for them. So how do we take our knowledge from something like Bronto, where we took it from 0 to $50 million in revenue, and say, okay, well, let's help a business is doing $1, $2, $3, $4, $5 million in revenue, and let's help them be the next Bronto and help the area that way as well. So that's Jurassic Capital. Of course, we have to bring in the dinosaur theme. The third one where I spend time with is in North Carolina. There is a high school, state magnet school called the North Carolina School of Science and Math. Mm-hmm. It's for juniors and seniors in high school. For most part, students from all over the state live there. And then they have a more rigorous science and math curriculum. It's actually part of the UNC system. So my daughter started going there, my oldest, even though it's in Durham and she only had to kind of move a mile away. It's a really good school. It's free, so it has meritocracy. It can bring people from lots of different backgrounds. And so when I looked at a lot of the successful startups in the Triangle, I noticed that back in the day, many of the co-founders or people in the leadership team, they had gone to this school, right? They're pretty sharp. They're willing to do something kind of different, independent. They were pretty scrappy. And so you fast forward about 15 years, and then they were part of the startup scene. So if I want to augment or amplify what we're doing here in the area, maybe a good way of doing that is inspiring these kids kind of early in their trajectory. And so last summer, we started with our first cohort of 8 students, and we kind of placed them essentially in a 5-week internship at these different tech startups around the Triangle. And so we're looking to grow that. So that is also in the spirit of what Colopy Ventures does, of supporting and educating and investing in the local community from a tech venture perspective.
That is awesome. My younger sister went to the School of Math in North Carolina.
Great.
Science. And so, yeah, I mean, it's a great, I mean, to your point, which I want to echo, right? You used the word, what did you say?
Meritocracy.
Meritocracy, yeah. Right? It creates diversity because you just have to be skilled enough, smart enough to get in. Right?
Yeah, it's not based on money. It's in fact, it's the other way. It's free, right? And so, and the kids get really, really close and tight. It's just, even just locally, you just look at, let's say Eric Trowan at Pendo, he went there. If you took Judd Bowman at SIFT, he did there. He spun his company out of there. And there are a lot more, those are more prominent examples, but there's a lot more than that. And that's just in this area.
Yeah, no, that's phenomenal. So last question, and then purposely, and I'm glad that we did, because what a nice break this hour has been from kind of the pandemic, COVID, all that stuff. And part of what we want to give our listeners is kind of refreshing perspective that, there's going to be light at the end of this tunnel, and how do we orient our mind to succeed in this new land that we're working on. But I'd be remiss if I didn't get your perspective on kind of what you're seeing relative to the economy, relative to startups and navigating this environment. So any thoughts as we end up with, or advice that you'd give entrepreneurs or people in general as we look to the future in this kind of arena of economic uncertainty?
I look at it from 2 perspectives. So when I left Red Hat, I had it way back when, it was rolling into the .com bust. And it was really dark days, particularly in the tech sector. And I remember I started working on what would become Bronto, and I had a neighborhood friend, and I didn't know him terribly well. And he's like, "What are you doing?" And I explained this. I'm working from home. I'm kind of working on this. And it's always depressing when you're working at home. People think that, you have to just be very self-motivated because you don't really have an easy answer in terms of where you're spending your time. You feel like a complete failure. But I was explaining this, and it was kind of internet tool, blah, blah, blah. And he told me, and this is, mind you, 2001. He's like, the internet, isn't that kind of over? And so if you think of the .com bust from a regular person, that was over. But clearly, it was far from over. And I think it's very easy to think there's no future opportunities when everything's kind of dark. But that is actually when one's ability to kind of focus and listen without distraction. And there's a lot of heads down work that can be done. That's not glamorous. It's really a great time to be kind of doing that. I think as it relates to what's going on now, I think each dot-com bust, the Great Recession, it affects everything, but then it affects certain sectors acutely. So dot-com bust was obviously the tech sector, particularly the investing tech sector. Great Recession, I think you're going to see a lot around the financial sector and around real estate in particular. And this one, obviously it's tough all over, but particularly the service industry, really, really hard hit certain sectors. So I don't have any great answers. I think we will kind of like muster through. I think it's people's ability to adapt. I'm definitely hopeful of the future. So I think being very resourceful, being cautious, but still pushing forward is kind of the name of the game during this time. And the people that do will be successful. I mean, the large tech companies of today were the ones that started before the .com. I mean, Amazon was in the mid 90s. They with Salesforce, all those, but they kept on pushing forward and they got stronger because there was something about them that meant they were good, their weather. So it's a toughness game, I think.
Oh man. So as we wind down, and I appreciate your time, I want our audience to take away a lot, but the keen listening and getting your ego out of the way to really hear, and that situational awareness, right? Not just listening with your ear, but really taking in all the factors that are going to go towards making good decisions. And then the strength to push through, right? I think the last statement you made is ultimately, right, there's a toughness factor. And the companies that are succeeding today started, the Amazons of the world, like you described, right? They had to push through tough times where they were non-believers in what they were doing, where people told them they were crazy. And then the third thing, that as successful as you have become, and the giving that you're doing, that somebody told you in 2001, that internet thing isn't that over, right? That is good stuff. So Joe, thank you so much. I feel like I know you personally and better. I'm very appreciative. And in a sincere way, if there's anything that we can do to be a blessing back to you, please reach out and ask, right? If you're doing things with one of your companies or young people and you see that our skills and our perspective can be helpful, we definitely are willing to reciprocate for the time that you've given to us. Thanks so much.
All right. Thank you.
You can't stop me. Nothing's gonna stand in my way. Nothing. I'm gonna fly higher. I'm gonna fly higher.
That was Joe Colopy. To keep up with him and the Triangle Starter community, be sure to sign up for GretB at www.gretb.com. And thanks everyone for listening. We'll begin your feed every week with new episodes from entrepreneurs who inspire you to do more. So be sure to subscribe to the show, and if you have a minute, give us a rating and a review as well. This podcast is edited and produced by Earfluence. If you're looking for more information on how full-service podcast production can amplify your voice, build your community, visit earfluence.com. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you soon on the Donald Thompson podcast.